So, all too often we hear some people who are not that on the up and up on either science or theology say that evolutionary theory disproves the existence of a God. And I would disagree with that 100%. Science doesn't say anything about God's existence. Theology job. However, you can have theological implication from scientific data. So science doesn't necessarily go to spit in the face of the divine, but if certain scientific truths are correct, then it goes to show that there are some theological beliefs that are incorrect if those beliefs are not in line with the scientific data. For example, if evolution is true, younger creationism can't be true. Therefore, younger creationism is false because evolution is a fact. Now, that doesn't mean God does not exist, but that interpretation of God on with reality. And so, my argument is a little bit different because I've yet to see a theistic evolution versus atheistic evolution debate. And so my argument for God's existence actually comes from evolution, and I've written it down. And so, reading from my argument, I state one of my arguments for God's existence from natural theology is the intelligibility of evolution and evolutionary repeats. It may be that evolution seems to be intelligent because evolution resembles a mind. That evolution could be, in fact, a guided biological language for a diversifying species. In the same way, a computer programmer can create a random or unpredictable process that brings about certain functions. My point in case is this: from the evidence of the natural world, theism seems to make sense of the intelligibility behind evolutionary processes and nature rather than traditional nihilistic atheism that argues for dysteleology. So I have in the description box below a link to an article by Southampton University, and it asks the question of, is evolution more intelligent than we thought? There's a professor who has a model called learning theory, and he basically posits that evolution can learn and evolution can think. Now, his argument comes from an atheistic perspective, or it comes from a teleological perspective, where he says that he thinks his model will be able to account for why biological organisms appear to be sophisticatedly designed. And I think his model actually goes against his point. Model we're shown to be true that evolution can think and evolution can learn and it can change patterns. Um, I think that would resemble a mind. Um, why does evolution appear to be so intelligent? Because there's a mind behind it. Duh. Um, a really good example is in the movie Wanted. There is a what they would say random process that is, I think it's like a printer. It's an old it's basically an old printer. It's a very old ancient copy machine. And what happens is um there's a supposedly random process that spells out a name, and whoever name whoever name comes up through this random process, they then have to be assassinated. And so we um these different names would come up. And the thing I was thinking to myself is the type of information this printer was producing was information at the highest form. It wasn't just um apobetics. I think that's the name of it. It wasn't just purposeless, meaningless, but this printer that nobody was supposedly controlling was printing out entire names of people in the room. And come to find out at the end of the movie, it wasn't completely random. It was rigged the whole time, and somebody was going into the system, submitting certain names of people they wanted to be assassinated, and having these people kill each other, uh, and having them not knowing. And he chalked it up to random chance, and that's all they needed to know. So in the same way, um, you can use a random process for an overall goal. You can use something that is unpredictable for an overall outcome. Scientists do it in the lab all the time. Random computer evolutionary algorithms for an overall purpose. Like for example, if you go to the stock exchange, I know there's certain computer algorithms that are random that give people I think certain percentages for the stock value. So that's one way we can use randomness for a purpose. And so the type of randomness in evolution isn't the same type of randomness that atheists are positing. So it's not a purposeless, meaningless type of randomness, but the type of randomness we see in evolution, um, it does have a goal. Ray Morris, uh, in his debate with Stephen Jay Gould for the last 20 something years, Stephen Conway Morris was saying that Stephen Jay Gould was wrong and evolution is not completely random. And now the science is starting to suggest that it was inevitable for us human beings, for us Homo sapiens sapiens, to come onto the scene. Because no matter how we would have replayed the tape of life, if we were to replay it again, Stephen Jay Gould, it seems to be wrong that the tape of life would replay in the same way, suggesting that these processes, random or not, they are directed. And that is the point that the theistic evolutionist is trying to make. That there is a purpose and a meaning behind these, and to get the deeper meaning in the bigger picture of that purpose, uh, I would say is in the book of Scripture. So God has given us two books. Of course, God's given us the book of nature, and God's given us the book of Scripture, and we get the overall, we get the big picture from reading, of course, the creation account and the Old Testament books, of the Bible, and the New Testament, where the Bible talks about the new heavens and the new earth. I think that's a better way to look at it. And I think that the theistic approach actually gives a more rational explanation for these processes. Because if these processes are inevitable, it seems to me that they're directed and they do have a purpose. They do have a teleology. And I think the best philosophical explanation for evolution, why evolution is going the way it's going, and why are things the way they are. I think the best explanation for that is God, and I think the atheistic position lacks explanatory power unless you want to talk about the multiverse, which I don't think we have any observable evidence for the multiverse. On the Christian spectrum, though, we do have evidence for the Christian religion being true, because it makes certain falsifiable predictions, like number one, um, Jesus of Nazareth existed, which we have a plethora of evidence for the historicity of Jesus, and so on and so forth. But that is my argument for God's existence from evolution. Evolution seems to resemble an intelligence, probably because it does resemble um, an intelligence, and that intelligence being a mind, and that mind being God. So that's my argument. I wouldn't call it a God of the gaps argument. Somebody actually said this is the God of the gaps argument. No, not at all, because I'm I'm making theological inferences from the data. Science is a slave to philosophy. Um, so even if you want to argue uh, about science not being a slave to philosophy, you have to philosophize about why you think that science and philosophy are divorced. You can't necessarily have one without the other, because even when you are done doing the science, you have to philosophize on what the science means. And I think it's completely okay for me to philosophize, or for me to talk about what the science means theologically, and come to the best theological inference. And I think the theological inference is the best philosophical explanation, hence being why I think this argument is valid. So